So
yeah, you want me showing everything right now?
I'm just going to put my slideshow in presenting mode. It looks like a couple people are still joining, so I'm going to hang on for just a second and let everyone kind of filter in. But yeah, hi everyone. Just out of curiosity, is there anyone in here, other than exec obviously, is there anyone in here that was at my web development talk last semester? Or year, I guess?
Yeah.
I'm a new member. I wasn't there.
Cool. Welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, well then that's good because I'm going to be going over the basics of web development. I'll start off kind of as a theoretical introduction. So if you're familiar with web development already, you might know some of the stuff that I covered at the very beginning. And then I will hand it over to you guys, actually. I'm going to do, depending on kind of interest, which we'll talk about whenever we get to that point, I'm either going to have you guys move into the 3 chat rooms, which we've designated as breakout rooms, or we can maybe stay in here. And I'm going to have you guys actually open up an online IDE for web development and make a personal website. And I'll just be here to help, like if you have any questions or whatever. But the goal of this is to end the evening with everyone having made a website. So, yeah. I'm gonna, let's see, how many, we have 13 people. I'm gonna flip my camera on just so you guys can see me. And if we run into a rate limit in terms of how many people are able to join the stream, I'll just flip it back off. Also, I mentioned this in the beginning, I am recording this. The recording sees exactly what you guys are seeing. So if anyone wants to go back and look at this at any point, we'll figure out a way to get it to you. But yeah, I'm guessing that we are at I'm gonna at everyone, because at here only does.
About to at 100 people, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, they're in the thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. They joined this because they want to learn. So yeah, just out of curiosity, I'm gonna be asking some questions just because I'm used to giving this talk in person, where it's a lot easier to do a back and forth versus a traditional lecture style. So if you want, whenever I ask anything, you can either unmute, or we have a channel called Text for Voice, so you can answer in there. But yeah, just out of curiosity, has anyone ever done anything with web development before? And when I say web development, this week I'm going to be covering HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to some extent. Next week I'll be going into React and other JavaScript frameworks. So whenever I say web development throughout this talk, I just mean HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, basically.
Yeah, I've worked with them before.
Cool.
I've done free code camp, and I learned HTML and CSS at an elementary level. But I definitely know more than nothing now. I can play around with it. So.
Awesome. Is there anyone that's just literally never heard of it, never looked at it, which is fine because this talk, like I said, is going to be going over the basics, so that's kind of who this talk is catered to. But is there anyone who just hasn't messed with it at all? It's okay. That's what I'm here for. Yeah, so basically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the 3 languages that I'm going to be talking about throughout the evening, so you heard me say it a lot, and together they make up the entire internet. Everything at its core is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Any website, they might use something else to kind of compile, or they might use something else to build the website, but at the end of the day, it all compiles down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. which I'm trying to think of a better term just because that's a lot of stuff to say. But yeah, here is the, are you guys able to see the entire slide?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so here's the kind of a breakdown of what each of those mean. The way I like to think about it and the way that helped me when I was learning it is HTML is like the bones of the website, CSS is like the skin of the website, and JavaScript is like the muscle of the website. And the three of these in conjunction are all come together to actually make a website. You'll see websites that only use two of these things. Most every website is going to have to use HTML because it's the actual core content of the website. Some people, by choice, avoid CSS because they prefer the minimalistically styled HTML design. And a lot of websites, especially things like the beginner portfolio website type of deal, just don't really have a need for JavaScript. It's easy enough to do everything in HTML and CSS, so they just don't use it. Here I'm going to pull up my personal website just to give you an example. I built this using React, which, as I mentioned, I'll be doing a talk on that next week, so make sure you tune in because React makes it a lot easier to kind of design production level websites and makes it easier to reuse stuff that you've already made. So I'm a huge fan of it, but yeah, this is a website that is made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If I go over here and I disable the styles, you're able to see this is just the HTML and JavaScript of the website. I also don't have very much JavaScript. I don't know if there's anything visible on here that would be JavaScript. But together they form this triangle of web development. So in any production website, you're going to have all three at some point or another. When you cut out a key element, like in this case, I just removed the CSS by just disabling the styles. So you're able to see that my website does still have structure. Here's title, here's headlines, that sort of stuff. But CSS is what really brings it all together and makes it pop. Same with Google. If you go to Google, they, at the end of the day, compile down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as well. So when you're searching something, you're entering into a HTML text field that's styled with CSS to make it, pretty and round and have text shadow. Stuff like this little animation, that is JavaScript. So if you cut any one of those elements out, here's without CSS, it's not terribly difficult, but it's pretty weird. Like there's a search bar, it's down at the bottom. Here's a bunch of menu items. It's just difficult to navigate. Same with if you disable JavaScript, at the beginning it's not going to look that much different. But with JavaScript disabled, when you search, stuff like predictive search isn't going to show up because it can't get the data that it needs. After searching, it's going to be a lot different because it's not able to dynamically render certain types of data depending on your search. So this is what it would look like without JavaScript. And again, if you remove both HTML, or if you remove both CSS and JavaScript, it just is a very plain, bare bones website. This one's a little bit easier to navigate, but it's still not great. So yeah, that is just a little bit of example. For comparison, here's what it looks like with JavaScript enabled. It's a lot more like a traditional Google stuff. It's able to pull dynamic content such as, see results about, see suggestions, that sort of thing. Drop downs are mostly JavaScript enabled because they dynamically show or hide content based on user input. So that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at its core. I'm going to have you guys, I've actually got the wrong set of slides on here, unfortunately. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you open up what's called a code sandbox. I'm sorry, give me just 1 second because the slides were wrong. What code sandbox is is it is a online IDE. It is fully functional in terms of web development. It works for both traditional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript websites, as well as all sorts of frameworks, like I've been mentioning. We're going to be using those a lot. So basically, all you have to do is you go to codesandbox.io. I would recommend signing in. They have sign in with Google and sign in with GitHub, both of those, just because that makes it easier to actually save the your website. And then at the top, after you signed in, there will be a sign up button up here, and then there will also be a create sandbox. So if you guys want to go ahead and go on to Code Sandbox, I'll probably stay on this. Well, here, I'll open up what it looks like and then stay on the slides for the rest of it. The URL is codesandbox.io. You'll want to sign in and create a static sandbox. Static is just what they call HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Here's the link to where we're going. I'll give you guys a minute to get this stuff pulled up. If anyone has issues, unmute or send a message in the text or voice chat. We can figure it out.
The website seems kind of slow to load.
Yeah, it's a fully functioning IDE in your browser, which is really cool because it means you don't have to download anything, but obviously that comes with the penalty of speed. And that's another good reason that a lot of people move to something like a React framework. It takes a little bit longer to compile stuff, but it makes it easier to optimize things like data loading, importing, getting dynamic data, basically. That's one of its core helpful pieces.
Is there a feature on Code Sandbox that REPL doesn't have?
I moved to Code Sandbox because Replik's a lot easier. Well, Replik's a lot simpler, basically. I moved to Code Sandbox because it has more features. The main reason I did it is because since I am going to be talking about React, doing React in Replit is more difficult than doing it in Code Sandbox. So I figured instead of trying to use two completely separate online IDEs, we'll just use the one that has more features.
Okay.
But yeah, for those of you who don't know, Replit is another online IDE that you can do web development as well as some other languages. They have a lot of languages. So it's pretty cool. And then also Microsoft, if you're familiar with Visual Studio Code, Microsoft is actually, I don't know if it's a thing yet, but they are making an online web development IDE as well. So it's pretty cool. It just makes it easier to get spun up and not have to download as much stuff. So yeah. If anyone needs me to slow down, just like I said, feel free to message. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. So as soon as you create a static, that's what it's called, yeah, a static code sandbox, they are going to give you something that looks like this. This is HTML. This is hypertext markup language. It's got a lot of stuff, obviously, but that's okay. We'll go over it. Basically, this is just a static template for web development. And at the beginning of the talk, I said that one of my goals was to make sure everyone leaves with a website. Technically, it was kind of cheating because technically this is a website. On Code Sandbox, you're able to open it in a URL, or in a new tab, I mean. You get a Code Sandbox generated URL for it, and it's live. So technically, I already did my job. I already gave you guys a website. But obviously, I'm going to go over a little bit more on what that entails, because this is a lot of stuff. But yeah, this is all HTML, straight HTML. So whenever you type anything on here, unless you're going to a separate file or adding some special tag, which we'll go over later, you're writing straight HTML. It's comprised of two main elements, the head and the body, and it's a very nested language. So if you notice, everything's nested in an HTML tag, and then it's sub-nested in a head tag, and then there's individual tags. Some of them even have text nested in them. Some of them are just self-closing, so they don't have anything inside. Indentation does not matter in HTML because it's just read top to bottom, which means theoretically you could write it as one really long line, but don't. Make sure to keep your indentations clear, because it is a very important thing just for keeping you organized. I would argue it's more important in HTML compared to most languages that you just won't be able to figure out where you are if the indentation's off. But yeah. This is just a basic HTML tag. I have an H1, which is a header. It's a first level header. And then I have a P, which is a paragraph of body text. You'll want to make sure, it trips a lot of people up at the beginning. You'll want to make sure that when you're writing your tags, you have both a properly formatted opening and a properly formatted closing tag. Because forgetting a closing tag is basically the equivalent of forgetting a semicolon somewhere in a traditional programming language. It might not be obvious where you forgot, but it's definitely going to just throw a lot of things off. So yeah, then you'll notice the HTML tag, beginning tag is just an H1 with angled brackets. Closing tag is an H1, same actual tag, just with a slash. And here's just an example that breaks it down a little bit. Inside of your opening tags, you'll often have several types of attributes, which are just key value pairs. All attributes. Attributes are almost always strings. I think theoretically you can have non-string attributes, but for the most part you'll treat them as a string value in a keyword. So yeah, you have the opening tag, which is an orange. You have whatever encloses it, so it can be a string, or it can be more sets of tags, and then you have your closing tag. So yeah, I'll go back to the starter template that you guys all have, and just point out some important stuff. Everything inside of this head tag is stuff that you don't actually directly see on the web page. So this is stuff like saying that it's using UTF-8 as the encoding. It's saying that for devices, this is specifically for mobile devices, it's saying start it at a 1.0 scale, which just makes it easier to see, basically. It makes your website zoom in to mobile instead of trying to fit everything like a desktop. This is a newer tag. It is just basically a transition to help from Internet Explorer to Edge. And then the title is what's up at the top. So for this website, the title tag would be dashboard and then a hyphen and then code sandbox. So yeah, the head is where you store all your metadata. It's where you have anything that's not directly impacted on the page. And then the body is everything that you see on the page. So in this case, you'll see one first level header that says this is a static template, there's no bundler or bundling involved. And we'll go over bundlers next week, so don't worry about that. Yeah, that's about it. This is just a special comment that says it's an HTML document, basically, because there's there were a couple different ways. It's really just for backwards compatibility. Everything's written in HTML anymore. But yeah, that is HTML. I'm going to pop out of this slideshow just for a second and go to my code sandbox, just so I can get you oriented. I guess before I continue, does anyone have any questions? Again, feel free to unmute or ask in the chat.
Yeah. What I got kind of lost. What template do we use on the sandbox? I was verifying my password.
The static template. So you'll hit create sandbox, and then for you it'll be down here. For me, I've used it already. Yeah, this 5 is a logo for HTML5, which is the current newest version of HTML.
Okay, thanks.
And it has been for a while now.
Yes.
10 or so years.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, here's your index.html file. That's where you write all your HTML code. The package.json and sandbox.config.json are just configurations. It's a way of using JavaScript, a package manager for JavaScript. It's basically just for code sandbox. We will go into what those actually do in more detail next week. But yeah, as I said, you already have a fully functioning website. If you go to your specific URL on any device, it will load. Like, this is just a publicly accessible website. The nice thing about Code Sandbox is it's also pretty much instantaneous. So you type it, and then you just make sure you save. That circle means unsaved changes, and then it updates, and it updates. So that's another good reason about another thing that makes Code Sandbox really useful. Is it's very fast to make changes.
I have a question. To actually, once we build the website to its finished point, like server-wise, like setting up a server for it, like, what's the best way to do that? Because I was thinking about making my own portfolio website and like support it with like an Apache server through like Raspberry Pi. Is that a good idea? Or?
The problem with that is you have to open a port on your local network. Which most, if you're in an apartment complex, most of the time you can't, because you're not a network administrator for that network. The easiest thing that I do is I use something called Netlify. Netlify is a really cool website. I can't speak highly enough about this. As far as I know, actually, just before I go to Netlify, as far as I know, I think Code Sandbox is pretty permanent. Like, I'm sure at some point, if you just leave it and don't ever touch it again, I'm sure at some point you might get deactivated. But like I said, this is a domain. So like for testing purposes, you can use this on any device. If I pull it up on my phone, you can see it, which is good. So you can develop on your phone and see what it's going to look like. But Netlify is by far what I recommend. It's completely free. They use several different frameworks. So this is React. That's what we're going to be using next time. And they have a direct integration with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and I think custom Git providers, if that's your thing. Which basically means that as soon as I push a commit, Netlify can auto-deploy it, or it can automatically build a preview of that deploy.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's what I use for all my personal websites. It just makes everything easy. I will probably walk you guys through setting up Netlify next week.
Netlify, okay.
It's more useful. It's more useful for this stuff because it's also a builder. So like on my GitHub, for my personal website, I have my raw React code. I don't have compiled HTML. Netlify, as part of its build process, is able to compile that React stuff down to HTML and deploy it at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I will probably talk about that more. And then if you're already on the GitHub kick, GitHub has, it's called GitHub Pages. It's only for static sites and Ruby sites, or Jekyll sites, which are built on Ruby. I used to use those before I got into the React JavaScript frameworks, so I haven't really done very much with that recently, but if that's your thing, check it out, because it is nice to have everything built directly into React. So,
I heard about
mhm.
Git pages. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? It feels weird having no one else here, but feel free to interrupt me. I know everyone always says that, but I actually mean it. Like, if you have any questions, even if they're not directly related to what I'm actually talking about, just ask.
I have one.
Uh-huh.
I was just gonna say, like, how common practice is it to use like a boilerplate? I don't know if you're familiar with Skeleton, but I saw that one.
Mhm.
Skeleton's really nice and makes everything look nice once you like link to it in the head.
Mhm.
And I didn't know if that was like common practice to kind of make your own design or to use like other boilerplates that already exist.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah.
will it seems to eliminate a lot of the work in making your website look nice. I was just wondering if
Yeah.
you take on that or no.
So Skeleton, I really liked it. I haven't messed with it in years just because it's I haven't written plain HTML in a while. I've been on a React kick for probably a year to a year and a half now. But I distinctly remember Skeleton. Actually, I'll just put it in a demo real quick. Skeleton's pretty nice. It is a skeleton. Like, it is a very bare bones thing that they kind of expect you to put your own stuff on top of. Bootstrap is is the main actual like template type of thing, or not a template. It's the main boilerplate that actually has like a very opinionated styling system and lots of things to memorize. It's just it's a set of CSS classes and some JavaScript, which we will cover later. I'm not gonna use Bootstrap, but yeah, I feel like it's pretty common to, at least when you're getting started, I feel like it's really common to do stuff. I definitely had a lot of bootstrapped websites. Once you kind of get more deeply involved in actually like doing your own web design, you tend to move away from that sort of stuff just because it quickly becomes very restrictive and very like, there's actually a website designed about this. I don't know. Sorry, there's a bad word. If you don't like it, close your eyes. This is a very common Bootstrap design because every Bootstrap website has like a nav bar like this and a, call to actions. Like, this is literally like what every website built with this ends up looking like to some extent. So I haven't used them in a while just because I kind of do my own thing. But yeah. I definitely think when you're getting started, they're a huge benefit. I was going to drop it in, but I guess they don't have a CDN, so I probably won't do that. But definitely mess with it. You can mess with it during our personal time. Yeah, let me go ahead. I'm going to pop over back to the slides real quick, go over some Did I answer your question, by the way? Sorry.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
I'm going to go through the rest of these slides real quick. There's not a whole lot. And then I'll kind of turn it over to you. Oh, Hunter has a question. I'll turn it over to you guys after I finish these slides. Hunter, yes, Hunter, that's essentially what we do for the ACM website, where we have a repository of source code. We have a build step that builds it for us, and then we push it to a second repository of compiled HTML code. So yes, theoretically, it just probably wouldn't be pleasant. Yeah. Oh, and for the recording, the question was, can you build React using Travis CI, which is a continuous integration deployment program, and push it to a GitHub Pages repository? The answer is yes. Kind of hard, but yeah. Let's go over CSS. CSS is a completely different style and mindset from HTML. This is kind of the bare bones example, and then this is some actual examples, and we'll go over what the selectors are. But basically, It stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and what it means is it starts at the top of the page, reads that rule. The rules are just, again, key value pairs. So it starts at the top, reads that, goes down, does the next thing, and goes all the way down the page. So that means that the rules on the top could theoretically get overridden by the rules at the bottom, and that means that, by extension, that means that your most common rules go at the top, like the most broad and more specific rules go at the bottom. I'll go back and show you how to do that. So here's an example of a theoretical, this is like the actual theoretical CSS file. In this case, this is selecting all first level headers. So in this file, every first level header would be green. And then it selects classes. So this is a .special class. So anything with the attribute with a class of the name special has a bold font. And then finally,
I think his connection's lagging.
can you still hear me? Maybe.
You're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, it's pretty skippy. Might just be internet hiccup.
Let me try that. We'll see.
Might be good now.
Okay. Yeah, so basically it goes from most general to most specific as you go down the page, is the easiest way to structure it. So in this case, this would be a green title or first level header. This would be a bold green first level header. And this would be a green first level header with the with a width of 100 pixels, a static width of 100 pixels instead of just resizing.
Could I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, since you can sort of do the same things, if you were to like use a class as opposed to an ID, it seems just from what I've seen that classes are more popular to do stuff with, like to modify elements. You're like most often use a class as opposed to an ID, but it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a difference functionally.
Yeah, there's not at all. The reason that you use a class instead, well, there's not for CSS. CSS does not care what the selector is at all. So these all work the exact same way. Same with HTML. HTML also doesn't really care. The problem is, in JavaScript, it's very common to do document, which is like the keyword for the entire page. So document.getElementById. by ID. So if you run document.getElementById by ID, word mark, and there's 2 word marks on the page, it's not gonna, like, it can't do that because it expects ID to be its own thing. It expects something with an ID to be unique on the page. So that's why it's more common to use classes, because when you're styling CSS, like, more than likely you're not really going to care. Like if I had a green box class, I'm not going to care how many green boxes are on the page, if it's 1, 5, or 10. So I'll just use a class because that gives me the flexibility to, on the HTML side of things, on the JavaScript side of things, that just adds clarity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
But yeah, there's no functional difference at all. It doesn't actually do anything different. It's just specificity levels. So yeah, let's work with CSS. All you have to do is you have to type in this one line of code into the head. You put it in the head because it's establishing a link, like a reference to another file. I guess it's like an import, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, it's not something that is directly going on the page, so it would be in the head, not the body. So you'll link your new file. Well, you'll create a new file, I guess, and then you'll link it. And to create a new file in Code Sandbox, you just have to, go to File, New. It'll be an untitled file, and then when you do Control or Command S, you'll just call it /index.css. You have to specify the slash. I don't know why, but you do. So yeah, now I have my index file, or index.css file. And then I just have to go into the head and link it. So I'm doing a link with the relationship of the style sheet and the reference of index.css. This harks back to the 215 days. If you were in 215, you should maybe remember this. Having an absolute versus a relative path. I know I harped on this all the time when I was a 215 TA, so hopefully some of my students are here and remember it. But this slash at the front means it's an absolute path, which means at the base of the website, you're using the file called CSS. In this case, it doesn't matter because there's a folder, or there's no folders, everything's just in the root directory. But theoretically, like if your HTML file was in a folder somewhere and your index file was in the root directory, you would have to specify that slash, otherwise you wouldn't be able to get the right stuff. Another common thing is to create a folder called like assets, and then put the CSS file in there. And so then in that case, we would have to specify slash assets slash index.css. So yeah, all that's
Can you
important.
make the text larger in
Yeah.
the editor?
Maybe.
Maybe just like, yeah, if that works.
I feel like they have a presenter mode actually, which I thought was really cool, but I don't remember how to do it, so whatever. So yeah, and here I'll go back. This is the thing you're typing in. Everyone good with that? Cool. So yeah, we talked about CSS. If you want to go ahead and do something like this, you can. Now that you've linked the CSS file, it's good to test and just make sure that your link actually was established properly. So in this case, I'm selecting every H1 and I'm giving it a color of green. And then when I save this file, now you can see it's updated to be green. So I would recommend doing something like that. Do it with whatever color you want. Cool. So yeah, we really have two options. There are 10 of you guys. I might make a website of some sort just for fun. Just a little personal website about myself. But what I want you guys to do is also go onto the code sandbox that you've kind of started working with and try and get some stuff about you. It probably won't be a production level website, but that's okay because it'll get you kind of getting in the actual workings of HTML and CSS. There's not an easy use case for JavaScript right now that I can just there's not some low-hanging fruit that I can suggest for any of you. If anyone wants to do JavaScript, ask and I'll think of something, but I would definitely try and add some stuff. Here's just an example of various property or various elements. An image is an image, obviously. An A is an anchor tag. It's a link. So if you remember back to this adding CSS, the link tag is actually more of an import statement where it's linking two files together. An anchor tag is what we call a hyperlink. They both use the word href as a keyword to say where you want to go. Something like that. So A tags. A div is a division, I think it stands for. It's just a box. By default, it's a completely transparent box. But you can use CSS and classes to style it. Buttons are buttons. OL and UL is ordered and unordered list. This is a numbered list. This is a bulleted list. And then inside of these, each one takes an LI, which is a list item. It's like an actual bullet point. So like if you typed in hello, it would give you a bullet point of with the text hello. Or if I typed in, yeah, something like that. And then here's some examples of CSS. There are so many properties of CSS. The easiest thing to do is to Google, like, how do I change a text CSS? Or ask me, obviously, but like on your own time, the easiest thing to do is just Google it because it's really hard to memorize all the properties. And there's just so many resources. The resource that I highly recommend is w3schools.com. They, especially for web, like HTML, CSS, they have very clear examples. They don't go into as much of the like reasoning behind why it's this way, like a traditional documentation thing would. But if you're trying to figure out like how do I align an image, let's say, W3 Schools probably has a tutorial on it, and it's probably going to get you exactly what you need. So, yeah. So, there's 11 of you. I don't want to make this decision because I'm tired of talking. So if you want, we can all hang out in the main meeting room. Or we can move into the chat 1, 2, and 3 rooms. And it's really up to you guys. I'm kind of leaning towards the breakout rooms just because I want to be able to answer. Actually, no. Let's just stay in the main room for now, and if it gets too noisy, we can split off. But yeah. Does anyone know if you're also able to share your screen at the same time that I'm sharing my screen?
You can.
You can?
Yeah.
Then yeah, let's get developing. If you want to, you can share your screen. I'm gonna make a little website about myself, if you want to share your screen, you can, just because it'll make it easier to ask questions. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before we kind of stop?
So in the future, would you cover things like grid and kind of more general ways to like format CSS from like a big picture perspective?
I would love to understand grid enough to actually give a talk on it.
Fair enough,
I was stuck. My internship, we used flexboxes for everything, like literally everything. They actually had a rule that you couldn't add any margin or padding to anything other than a div or a flexbox. So I learned flexboxes really well. I could talk about that. But as far as CSS Grid, I just haven't messed with it enough to do it. But as far as I'm concerned, it's amazing and probably the future of web development. So it's definitely worth investing the time to actually learn properly. I just haven't done it yet.
Sweet, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does anyone else have any questions about anything really? Like I said, I can answer it even if it's not directly related to something I covered during the talk tonight. Cool. Well, let's get website making. I'm actually going to probably download the skeleton boilerplate. A boilerplate is a really easy web way, if you're not familiar, to get started with CSS. So in this case, this is the bare HTML of the skeleton website, but they actually use this site, this site uses skeleton. So by importing skeleton, your website very quickly just snaps and looks like that. So I'm gonna do an example about me. Again, you can follow along or not. It's really up to you. if there's any, again, stop me at any point, because now I'm just kind of doing my own thing, and I just wanted to open Skeleton and get started. But yeah.
Also, I found like this link when I was watching a video that like, or it was like the link attribute that I could put in the head, and it would just let me like, I could link to the skeleton like where it's like a
CDN.
It's like on Cloudflare. Yeah, it's on Cloudflare. Like it's just the actual file, and then you could just put that into the head, and it'll import it all from there. I don't know if that's what you were gonna do, but I thought I'd just point that out.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to mention. A lot of stuff that you're doing, if you're doing basic, like if you're doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript web development, the most common thing by far is to use what's called a CDN to get anything you're importing. So basically, any third-party library will be on a content delivery network. I'm gonna guess is what that stands for. It's something like that. And what it is it's someone that's already hosted the website, or someone that's already hosted the file you need. Because there's literally no distinction between internally and externally hosted files. So as far as HTML is concerned, there is no difference between having a style sheet that's hosted on your local computer using a local, I'll zoom out just to show you guys. Yeah, there's no difference between these two style sheets. I mean, for us, we can tell that one of them is internal because it has just a slash, and one of them external because it has a full URL, but there's no difference. But yeah, if you notice already right away, only using skeleton stuff, it looks prettier. They added some basic styles. Here's a paragraph about me. And again, at this point, you have styles on your website, so if you go disable them, you're able to see what it looks like as raw HTML. And this is what it would look like without skeleton, because skeleton is a CSS framework. But yeah, here's something about me. I'm going to add a link to the USC website. Just in case anyone doesn't know what USC is. I don't even know what I do. Oh yeah, I dance. So yeah, here's some more basic tags. An H2 is a second level header, so it's just smaller than a first level header. And then an unordered list is just bullet points. If I switched it to an ordered list, then it would be 1, 2, 3 instead. Yeah. I'm gonna put a class in here. So what I just did is I added a bold class to my markdown, or my HTML language, it didn't do anything because that's just an empty class that actually doesn't have any properties associated with it. What I have to do is I have to go over here and I have to create a bold class, and then I have to do something with it. So in this case, I would do font weight bold. And now you can see that as soon as I do that, anything that has the class bold is bolded. There's actually a tag. There's an HTML tag called em, like emphasis, that does the same thing. I think. Nope. That's there's a bold tag and there's also a strong. That's what it's called. Yeah. So that's the thing with these tags is like. It's hard to memorize them all, but it's really easy to Google HTML tag bold and see what happens.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is it like also like common practice to do inline styling as opposed to just doing everything on the style sheet?
No.
I mean, I don't know that some people have a strong opinion about that.
I would say no. I would say avoid that, specifically because inline styling. Are you talking about like? Are you talking about like having a style tag down here?
No, like I mean, like I guess like in the actual like in the attribute, like doing anything to modify like the text or like like if you know what I'm saying, like making it bold, for example, or anything like that.
Well,
just doing the raw HTML and then taking care of it in the CSS sheet.
Dalton means putting like a style, style in the P, so style equals.
Something like this. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like anything, any sort of CSS in the actual HTML file.
I would still say avoid that strongly because, well, actually, that didn't even work. But I would say avoid it because the point of CSS as a separate concept is to give you this like control that's almost like an inverted, or that's just like a V shape, where you define your common rules your general rules at the top and your specific rules at the bottom. When you're adding inline styles in, you're taking this V and you're just adding random dots in it. And inline styles absolutely override anything in CSS. So like, no matter what I say in P, even if I give this like an ID, which is the most specific style there is, it's gonna get overridden by the style tag. So I would say don't do that unless you have like a really strong need to, but you almost certainly won't with proper formatting. Or proper
I've got some
writing.
experience with this. So lately, especially the React community, React does it a little differently, but it's basically inline CSS.
Yeah, React I do actually do inline CSS, but that's a whole separate thing because it's not real.
The thing with that is it becomes very unmanageable when you want to redesign the website.
Mm-hmm.
At my work, we work. We've got a very long chain from OCaml to Electron app to straight OCaml. And the problem is when you want to redo and make things look different, you have to go through the entire code base and change all of the inline CSS, and you really don't know when you're missing something. And it's why, having it all in one place with some kind of organization, like what Dalton's talking about with V is just having some kind of like style guide, so you can quickly find things and know what's going on, is definitely much preferred over inline CSS. In big projects, inline CSS becomes like, tracking down stuff when you want to change things later on. It's
Right.
a very big pain, and it's a very, very popular thing in the React world right now. And we're starting to see like the issues with that as these very big projects become unmanageable.
Yeah. And React
Doesn't
has
scale well.
React has several different ways of doing styling. Almost never do you see a traditional .css file in a React project. But again, tune in next week for more fun with that. And I'm also gonna.
You do.
It's 8 o'clock.
You do. It's just generated.
Yeah, no, I mean, you never write, like, as a programmer, you never write a static CSS file for a React project, I would say.
Yeah.
Unless you have a very strong reason to, like, if you already have some, I don't know, corporate brand, but yeah, most of the time you're doing a CSS and JS thing.
With it because we write it in OCaml so that it both compiles the JavaScript for Electron and other apps, and it's native, and it gives us all of the goodies from a functional language. But having, it's all about organization, because the bigger these projects get, and I notice there's not a huge emphasis on it in the web dev world, and I'm really glad that Dalton brings this up, because, a website can get just as large as as maybe not an operating system, but, very, very large projects. Like, you could see websites that hit the 10,000 to 20,000 line, especially if you're doing, something that eventually compiles to native as well.
Right.
Which is a big thing nowadays with React Native and all of these cross tools that allow you to make one app and compile it to every platform under the sea. It's very important. No matter how you do, it's good to have, just organization.
Yeah.
So that's why inline CSS can get very messy.
Yeah. I'm going to give an example of what I was talking about with that V, because I feel like it's an important topic, just as far as the understanding of CSS. So I'm going to just comment out all this stuff, and I'm going to give you a couple different headers. Okay, so I have 3 headers right here. Because my CSS file is empty, they are all exactly the same. This class and ID has no relevance on. Actually, I'll do this. Now you have 4. Again, they're all exactly the same because there's nothing in my CSS file. What I was talking about with that V is you want to define your most general rules first. So in this case, an H1 tag is most general because it specifies every H1, no matter what. So let's say I want every H1 to be green. Actually, let's go brown. That's a good color. Now all of my H1s are brown. But then, let's say I have let's keep going. So I have a brown one. Let's say I want the font size for every one to be 20 pixels, which is significantly smaller than a normal H1, but I don't know. I'm making a website for ants, so the titles need to be smaller. I don't care. So every H1 in my website now has a brown 20 pixel tall title. What you can do next is go in here and start defining classes. So let's say, okay, well, I have these rules for my H1s, but some of these need to be bigger because they're, I don't know, for the queen, she's a bigger ant, so she needs to see bigger stuff. I hope you know that these examples are literally just me rambling. So what you can do is you go define a class. A class is more specific than than just a normal selector. So conventionally, you would want to put it lower on the inverted V because it affects fewer things. So now that I have this class, every H1 is a brown 20 pixel tall header, except for classes with a big boy, which are 30 pixels tall header. But then, let's just say you have something like that. Because this class is underneath this one, because small boy is underneath big boy, small boy takes precedence. So it's a 10 pixel tall header. So in this case, when the classes are, when both classes are on element, it just follows the pattern. Anyone have any idea what would happen if I take this out and I put it here instead? I haven't actually saved my changes yet. Does anyone want to guess? Maybe? Anyone?
I'm gonna give it a shot. It's gonna become a big boy.
No.
It will be both a small boy and a big boy.
Correct. It's always both a small boy and a big boy. But actually flipping the order of the classes that HTML is getting has no effect. Because HTML, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, these are all, it just says, okay, I'm going to be taking all the styles from big boy and all the styles from small boy. What matters is over here. Because of that V-shape I was talking about of specificness. If I take small boy and I physically move it farther up the page than big boy, now big boy takes precedence. So it says, okay, all H1s are 20 pixels tall. Any class with a small boy is 10 pixels tall. Any class with big boy is 30 pixels tall. And it goes in that order. So it literally sets 20 pixels for each of these. Then it says, okay, which ones are small boys? This one is a small boy, 10 pixels. Now, which ones are big boys? These two are big boys, 30 pixels. So that's why...
I have a quick question. Is this spec-based or is this implementation-based?
I guess it's spec, because that's just... I mean, it's literally cascading style sheets. It's what... That is CSS.
So I don't think it makes sense to ask because the spec was based on an implementation originally.
Yeah.
So, like, now there is a spec
really?
and all the browsers follow it, but like...
Yeah.
I'm just wondering because, I mean, at my work, we have to support Internet Explorer 6. It drives me nuts because I'm always asking myself, was this in the spec when Internet Explorer 6 came out?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know too much about the history of web development, but as far as I know, that's been how you do it since CSS became a thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's just how it works. And the idea of putting an H1 above a small boy, or an H1 above a class, that is more tradition based. Like, there's nothing wrong necessarily with me doing this, except for the fact, well, let's do this.
So it makes more sense to make these very small little classes and then to just mix them all together, like kind of like what they do in React, so they're reusable.
Yeah, the idea is I guess to style as general as possible.
And I guess that's why the de facto is to go general to specific.
Yes, because that kind of concept is more about the like what you were talking about with the keeping track of stuff, keeping organized.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Also, Dalton,
Yes.
have you used SAS or do you use SAS?
I like it a lot because it's the good stuff from. For those of you who don't know, SAS is a CSS. I don't know what you would call it. It's not necessarily a superset of CSS, but well, maybe it is. Basically, it adds more stuff to CSS, and at the end of the day, like I said, like everything, turns back into normal CSS. So the Sass processor, or preprocessor, I guess, handles all that under the hood, which I don't know about. I like Sass a lot because it makes it really easy to start doing more complex things. So like with normal CSS, if you wanted to start doing nested class, so like let's say I have a div something like this. This isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but it is a pretty good like a visual representation. Actually, something like this. So actually, let's even make it more general. Something like this. So let's say you had a details class where there would be an unknown amount of details, and you want every single name inside, or every single header inside of it to be blue. I'm using colors for all these. Any CSS property would work. It's just colors are very easy to visually actually see, assuming you're not colorblind. So they make good examples. But I could do something like what I was originally going to do, which is like a details name. But the other option is to use CSS to specify, okay, I want every H1 inside of a detail. And so that's how you would write it with normal HTML, or excuse me, normal CSS. With Sass, you would write something like this, which is going to complain about. But it makes it easier, in my opinion, it makes it easier to see. Like, it makes it easier to tell what you're doing, and makes it a little more intuitive because it adds more nesting similar to HTML. And then also, things like variables and stuff. CSS has finally started to get variables, kinda, but Sass makes it easier to manage those sort of things, and they have functions and stuff. So yes, I think it's a very good tool. Again, it's not that commonly seen in React, so I just haven't used it a lot recently, but I've definitely messed with it. And one more clarification. This is called SCSS. Sass syntax would be, it's a tab-based syntax, not a, it's something like this. That's something more like what Sass is written as. This is SCSS. They do the same thing, and they're made by the same people. It's just, do you want to have more familiar syntax or more legible syntax? Has anyone made a website that they, like, while I've been talking, has anyone made anything that they want to share? It's okay if you don't, because I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if you have, I want to see them. That's okay.
I have a actually slightly off topic, potentially because I'm asking about a static site generator.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if you just have a static site that you write with HTML and CSS, and you want it to display on both mobile and desktop and look good on both, what are your options in that regard? Like, I'm completely ignorant in this.
Yeah. So the question was basically mobile development. How do you handle mobile development on a static website, correct?
Yeah, because I realized that the ACM website uses Gatsby,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand that's a static site generator, and it looks good on mobile,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure it looks good on desktop. So I didn't know if the static site generator handles like.
No.
You know,
What a static site generator is it's a something that compiles to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without requiring a database is all that means. So like, we don't have access to a database for the for example, the meetings, like the different details about meetings in the ACM website. Traditionally, that would be stored in a database. There's no easily accessible database for us. So a static site generator instead uses a series of text files to contain that information, and then as part of the generating process, it turns those text files into static HTML files. So that's all that a static site generator is. It has nothing to do with mobile development, which you can do using normal CSS. And mobile development is more of a here's some stuff you shouldn't be doing versus here's some stuff that like you should do. I mean, it's both, obviously.
I have one more thing to that previous point. Static site generators are really awesome. They're really quick to make things. As far as dynamic sites, it really depends. So static site generator generates it once and then pushes it up, and it gets basically when your computer asks for a web page, it just gets the HTML that's not changing. With dynamic sites generate the content of the site that it's going to pass on the fly. That's the main difference between a static site and a dynamic site. And then the static site generator is going to take in some kind of input and generate a static site.
Yeah. I use database because it's the most common example, but there's all sorts of stuff that can be statically generated using a static site generator. And actually, next week I'm going to be using Next, which is a static site generator, in conjunction with Gatsby, or in conjunction with React. Yeah.
I wasn't going to share my like the website I made here, but I did make with the free code camp thing, I made my this survey website.
Oh, cool.
Which is and I'll just show it because I really don't have a lot of experience, but it just goes to show what I was able to do with not a lot of stuff. So can y'all see that?
It is loading for me. There we go. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, this was not that hard for I did the entire free code camp thing for HTML and CSS, and obviously I'd have to spice this up a bit. This is very generic looking, but I made this within probably 2 hours, which it took me a while, but I was able to put this all together with everything I knew, and I'm using skeleton on this, so it looks pretty clean. Other than this really bothered me, which I couldn't figure out, was when I did the radio buttons, when I use skeleton, the text go under the radio buttons.
That's weird.
I couldn't figure out how to get it next to them, and it was only with skeleton, which bothered me. But otherwise, I thought it looked pretty good.
Yeah, I actually really like it.
Use a divider and kind of make a table, and then basically place on the left side, you put 2 more dividers that are going to have their position fixed, and then put the text in the one divider, and then your input in the other divider.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Skeleton probably just overrode some default styling. So yeah, the easiest thing to do would be to that. You could also do CSS Grid or Flexbox if you wanted to get fancy, but there's nothing wrong with just using a float and a divider and stuff. But yeah, that looked really good.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it was just surprisingly simple once you understand the basic stuff. I was able to make that, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the thing with web development in general is once you kind of understand how to read it, because it is a little bit different mindset in terms of understanding where things go and how they're formatted. But once you get that stuff down, it's not terribly difficult to start getting stuff up on the page. But yeah, I did want to talk about mobile development just for a second because it's pretty cool, and David asked about it. Yeah, so like I was saying with mobile development, it's kind of more of a don't do this stuff, and the reason for that is because there's things that you do that are oh, this looks so good, I'm gonna do this, and then you go to try and look at it on your phone and it just doesn't look great. So I'll give an example. Let's say I have this details box. I'm going to give it, in here, I'm going to give it a border. which is fine. This isn't anything to do with development. So I give it a border, but then I don't like how it's going all the way across the page, because I'm going to be putting several. Oh wait, actually, this is the details. Okay, so I was putting the box, the border around the entire box, not just the text, because theoretically I could put more stuff in there. Yeah, there we go. But if I have two details like this, or let's say I have 6 details, there we go. I don't like how each one of these is side by side. So one, theoretically thing I could try is doing something like making each one of them really skinny and then putting them inside a... Actually, I'm trying to think of how to not do this in a web development way or a mobile development way. Most of the time, really what happens is you set something that's width, you set a fixed width object. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll say I want each one of these details to be 600 pixels. And there we go. Now I have a nice little border for, whatever I want to do. That's fine until because it looks fine on a website, right? Like, okay, these are all 600 pixels. That's a good width for my detail. But when you go into the phone version, you can see that it goes off the page. And that is a problem because it'll make the phone start side-scrolling and just doesn't look right. So you tend to want to avoid fixed width objects that can't be resized smaller with a phone. And that's hard to do because it doesn't really make sense. So what I recommend, especially for beginners, but honestly for everyone, is doing what's called mobile first development. Mobile first development is what it sounds like. It literally just means instead of using a preview like this, make the preview really skinny, more like what a phone would look like. So yeah, you can see, like if I open this on my phone, it'll be scrolling left really far because it's overflowing. So you can make the preview really skinny, or even do what I did, which is open it up in a phone preview box. And do all your development there, and then after you have it looking really good on a phone, then you can just go and start developing for a desktop, because it's easier to take something that you fit into a small screen and make it look good on a big screen. It's really hard to take something that looks really good on a big screen and cram it into a really small space. That's my opinion. There's other opinions out there, but in my opinion, mobile first development's the way to go. Yeah, and with Skeleton specifically, but this isn't actually not specifically, I just know Skeleton as an example. They provide the pixel numbers of where what they consider to be a phone and a tablet and a computer. So they provide these pixel numbers, and so like what you can say is on anything less than anything larger than a tablet. So let's let's say in this details box, a way to fix this would be setting the width to be 100%, because that's what we want on phones. We want on a phone, we want the width of these boxes to be 100%. But anything larger than a tablet, we don't want it to start, here, I'll show you an example. So now it's looking fine on a phone, it doesn't overflow, but on a tablet, or on a desktop or a tablet, it goes really too far to the right, and we don't like that. So what you can do is say, on anything larger than a tablet, be a max width of the size of the tablet. So that doesn't have any effect on the mobile first development that we did of a phone, But on a tablet, it constrains it to a certain size. That's just a really simple example of mobile first development.
So, in the final product, hypothetically, you would have like a, I guess, I don't know, in this case, like a media query for like each different device that could possibly use your website.
No, because like an iPhone SE is 320 pixels. An iPhone 8 is 400 pixels. In most cases, you're not going to care if the in most cases you would only need a couple breakpoints. Skeleton provides 5. In my opinion, that's too many. I only would use like 3, probably, like phone, desktop, and tablet. But like in this case, it makes no difference if the screen that you're looking at is, how big is my screen? It's pretty big. It's really big. It makes no difference if the screen that you're looking at is 1186 pixels or 1400 pixels. I just know that I don't want these boxes to go more than 750 pixels wide. So anything bigger than 750, no matter how big it actually is, I just set a media query for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. That makes like more sense. Like you kind of put them like into containers, or like compartments, basically based on like if it's an iPad versus a phone or like similar screen sizes.
Yeah,
it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're gonna have to have media queries most likely, at least for any like complicated website. Maybe not for a really simple website. So that's what I was talking about with mobile first development. Is you can either say larger than a tablet. You can either define your rule to be a tablet, or it's really just about your thinking. It's like, am I designing for a phone and then adding stuff to fix for the desktop, or am I designing for a desktop and adding media queries to fix for the phone? And in my opinion, designing for the phone and adding media queries to fix larger devices works a lot easier. And that's just not my opinion. That's not just my opinion. That's the prevailing web development opinion of the current times. Cool. I don't really have much else to show you guys, unless there's any specific thing that you like want to see, or again, if you just have questions. I mean, I'm more than
I have
willing to
another.
answer.
Sorry for all the questions, but
no, it's good.
There's a lot I actually don't know that I want to know. Just about like actual practice in the real world is from websites.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like another thing is like accessibility and making sure screen readers can process your website, and having like the alt attribute on like any picture that you're linking to, things like that for people with disabilities. Like, is that like an absolute necessity if you're gonna, like, obviously, like in software engineering, like obviously you need to like, think about that. So
yes.
I mean, like, is that something you always have to include if your website is going to be going to a broader, amount of people?
I would argue it's something that you have to include no matter what. I didn't do anything in this demo that would require special web accessibility. As far as professional applications, absolutely. I'm pretty sure it's illegal to not have basic web accessibility. No one really knows because the internet's a lawless land in terms of like governmental regulations, more or less. But like, it's just a good thing to do, because web accessibility, like, when everyone develops for web accessibility, they develop for blind people. That's like what the kind of concept is. But it's more than just blind people. It's people that, like me without my glasses on, there's some websites that I wouldn't be able to navigate. Or someone with arthritis or shaky hands, not being able to push a button. That sort of thing is also web accessibility. And I would argue that it's critical to... I mean, don't like freak out if you're just like with this demo. If you were following along with me and you forgot an alt tag on your image, like, oh well. But if you're releasing anything that you expect the general population to notice, I would say, there's at least the basics. Like there's some trainings on web development for accessibility that are pretty good. Really, the easiest thing to do is disable styles, disable JavaScript, and disable images, and see if it's navigatable with that's weird. Disable images doesn't work. See if it's navigatable via that. So in this case, like I have a clearly defined header. I have clearly defined subheaders for each of my stuff. Everything's laid out evenly. My links are properly named, and I should have alt text on my image. Maybe.
It's 8:30.
Yeah, so that's like that's the basics. Is like if you're able to navigate it without looking at the actual styles, then it's fine. There's some stuff that just becomes a business cost. That was something I talked about with my internship a lot, is we're doing things that aren't accessible, but that's just what the business needed, which sucked, but there's only so much you can do. But yeah, I would just be aware of it. Web aim is kind of by far like the biggest resource when it comes to web accessibility.
JavaScript is still disabled then.
Yeah. That's the thing, is like you want to make sure when you're navigating your websites, you want to make sure it works with that JavaScript, because a lot of people just don't turn it on. But yeah, that was an example of navigating without JavaScript on Google, is it didn't give me hardly anything. But yeah, like here's WebAIM, the accessibility people. Obviously they're a very accessible website as well. They have a training, and they also have Wave, which is a web accessibility evaluation tool. It's a Chrome extension as well as like a website, I think. Yeah. And what they'll do is, ooh, but that's not great. I guess it probably doesn't work with JavaScript. I'm gonna turn off these restrictions. JavaScript, it's less about, with disabling JavaScript, it's not as much about accessibility. It's more about like security conscious people used to turn JavaScript off all the time, and still some screen readers don't have JavaScript, so it is kind of important.
I don't know what you mean used to.
Oh yeah. But yeah, no, it's still important for accessibility, but it's also just good practice to make sure, like, at the very minimum, like if your website has to use JavaScript, you can put what's called a no script tag, which only shows for people that have disabled JavaScript, and it just says something like, hey, you need JavaScript to run this application, something like that. Anyway, I don't know how to use this thing. There we go, you have to put the HTTP in. So yeah, here's some stuff. It gives me some details. I have one error with low contrast where this link isn't readable enough. And I also have an alert somewhere saying like, hey, I went from an H1 to an H3. But overall, my website doesn't have any errors. Compare that to, let's see what they do. See how they do. I'm just curious, actually, I've never looked. So they do pretty good. They have one issue where this search, there's something wrong with their search button that isn't giving you stuff, but yeah, this web aim stuff does kind of break the design, but that's okay. It's more of an information stuff. So yeah, I would say definitely make sure you do the basics of accessible web development. Sorry to give such a long-winded answer. I probably should give a talk on that.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I know I keep kind of taking you in different directions, but
no, I mean that's the good thing about this stuff is, there's a lot of directions to go, but also I like talking about it. So
It's really cool. Yeah, I mean, you obviously know, I know a lot of people know about this sort of stuff in like this club, so I don't hold back when I want to ask questions.
Yes, yeah, it's always good to ask these questions. I probably actually might try and give a talk on web accessibility. Today I met this dude from the South Carolina Institute for the Blind, whatever their government agency's called that works with blind people. He came and talked to us about people that were both blind and deaf in my sign language class. Anyway, I talked to him and I asked him if he could get me in contact with whoever does like screen readers and stuff at the South Carolina government office, just because I feel like that'd be cool training to get from them. So maybe I'll do that and then report back to ACM with the results.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, does anyone else have any questions?
If I'm familiar with your website, when you scroll over the individual sections, like education and work, there's a little animation, right? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so that's a JavaScript thing, right?
Nope, that's CSS. Actually,
okay, that's what I thought. So you can do animation with CSS alone.
Yes. I'll be completely honest. I used my friend's framework. Lachlan Campbell is this person that I met in high school through the programming club that I founded in high school. And they are like by far like the best web developer. The best web developer I know. Yeah, so I stole Lachlan's like framework and used it for my own website. So a lot of the styles, I basically changed the colors on mine. Oh, that looks bad. I thought I fixed that. Oops.
And that's a hover selector, right? Like, and you would just do like increase the size of this box when you hover over it.
Yes. The thing that I was doing, I did this in Next.js, so I used a Next styling library, and I was trying to pull up the styling so I can actually show you what it looks like. So we are talking about the here it is. Yeah, so all it is it's a transform. It's a scale thing. So basically in 0.125 seconds, it animates as soon as you hover on it, or focus. Focus is with keyboard. That's another thing you want to test when your web accessibility is, can you navigate it without a mouse at all, using only the keyboard and tabs. But yeah, so whenever you hover or focus on it, it's going to get 1.0625%, well, whatever that is. It's going to get this much bigger, and it's also going to get a more deep box shadow, just around the outside, and that'll take 125 seconds. So this is CSS. This is just a special version of CS. Like, this is a CSS property. So you could copy transition, transform, and move this into CSS pretty easily. In fact, I'll just do that real quick. But yes, it's CSS. It's not JavaScript. So yeah, there it is. It's a little funky just because of padding, but whatever. That's all straight. I copied Lachlan's JavaScript stuff, but it is just a CSS. Oh, and here's something, since you guys are such a captive audience. DaltonCraven.me is my website, but I also have every version of the website before that. So here's the very first website I ever made. It was when I was in 10th grade. I was really proud of it. It's just straight HTML. One, two, three, four, and then correct. So yeah, it's like I said, I've been doing this for what, 4 years now, and you can see pretty drastically my improvement.
And it seems like also like, you probably realize after a while that, I'm starting to understand like that bootstrap-esque like dislike, because it's, like you can make a really simple website that's still appealing. Like it doesn't need to be like, formatted like that, and because it does look really cool, but I guess it's like it's so ubiquitous and just everywhere that once you start, like you do it enough and you learn to put your own touch on it, you don't need to rely on just one of those like boilerplates.
Yeah, and you can see that as I go through it. I'm gonna open up all of them so I can tab through them. But you can kind of see my style start to develop. And like I picked stuff up along the way. So like in this one, it was just the first website I made. I don't even think this was Bootstrap. I think this was before I knew what Bootstrap was. Maybe. It might have been Bootstrap. Yeah, no, this is just me. This is just styling. And then this was also just me. Nope, this is Bootstrap. Yeah, but you can start to see my color scheme pull through. This is where I got my font. I made my website more. I split it up into separate website or separate pages, basically. And then I went back to a single page layout, kept the coloring, tried to make it more like general. And then now I went with a slightly different color, a little bit more fun. Other than that, I hate that. But yeah. So yeah, you can see my style start to shine through bit by bit as I move away and into my own designs. But yeah, my opinion on Professor web pages. JJ Shepard uses Microsoft Word to design his websites. I don't know if you guys knew that, but he does. So he just makes them in Word, and then downloads them as an HTML file, which I actually didn't know was a thing. But
that's weird. That's cool.
Yeah. Professors and really serious web developers a lot of times don't style their websites, like by choice. Let me see if I think that Zach got rid of his website. Zach Lotta is the guy that founded Hack Club, the programming club that oh yeah, he's all over. Wow. Good for him. He's another really talented web developer. But for a long time, he used to just have a plain HTML website, no CSS. It adds to the vibe or something. I don't know. It's aesthetic.
Does that mean that like it'll auto convert? Like if you were to make a Word file into an HTML file, it'll auto convert all of it into HTML?
I guess so. I think he just exported it as HTML, like instead of exporting it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So here, this is Zach Lotta. The lack of CSS is intentional. Like a lot of web developers do this. I never did, but whatever floats your boat. I do, however, make sure that my website looks good without styles. That wasn't something I did before, you can tell. Well, this isn't that bad. It's not great. I didn't never fix the images, but it's not terrible. Cool. Any other questions? I'm literally just going to keep talking until we end the meeting, so don't feel like, obliged to keep listening. Ew.
Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful. I'm
that
excited.
Was great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, definitely tune in. I know the meeting's been over. I've still just been talking. It's mostly just exec. Mostly. There's a couple. But yeah, tune in next week. Come learn React. It's really fun. I'm super excited about it. I don't know at all what I'm going to talk about, but I'll figure that out on Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good night.
Have a good night, guys.
Good night.
Hey, David.